things that disturb him. These are the things. You know, a recent study was done on the members of Congress and members of the Supreme Court, asking what were the major influences in molding your political philosophy. I was shocked to learn that some of the most prominent leaders in the Congress cited Ayn Rand as the most important influence in their lives in molding their political philosophies. To me, that's frightening. That's absolutely frightening. Ayn Rand, author of The Fountainhead, who wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, who taught people, and there are persons all over this country who are followers of Ayn Rand, who laud selfishness and egocentricity. Just the opposite of what Jesus was all about. Ayn Rand says you got to look out for number one and not worry about anybody else. That's not where Jesus would be. And as a follower of Jesus, that's not where Martin Luther King Jr. would be. Unless a man lose his life, he cannot gain it. That's what Jesus said. Unless a man dies, he cannot live. You want to be my follower, said Jesus. This is Jesus. Sell what you have, give to the poor, take up the cross and follow me. It was Jesus who said, harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. America is, I think, economically doomed unless something incredibly radical happens. Here's what's going on. The wealth of this country is being concentrated in the hands of a very few people, the upper 5% of the population. Case in point, 25 years ago, the typical CEO of a major 500 club, 500 company, was making 30 times more money than middle management. Today, that person is making 300 times more money. They end up with multi-million-dollar bonuses for presiding over banks that are failing. Nobody's going to argue with this. The facts are there. The corruption on Wall Street, in which billions of dollars are shifting into the hands of a few people. And you say, and that's going to doom the nation? Of course it is. Two things. First of all, they get all kinds of tax deductions, all kinds of loopholes in the tax laws. So that a good example of this that nobody's going to argue with because he said it out loud is Mitt Romney, who is a good man, may I emphasize, a good man, who did nothing illegal. He took all the deductions he was legally entitled to and ended up paying 15% on the millions and millions of dollars that are his assets. While the typical factory worker and secretary ends up paying somewhere around 35% of his or her income. You call that justice? Martin Luther King would have railed against that. He would have said, this is not the way it should be. Woe unto you, Americans, who end up serving the poor. There's a couple of passages in the 10th chapter of Isaiah that go like this, railing against those who are in government. Woe unto you, who are the rulers of the land, who pass laws that oppress the poor and the widow and serve the interests of the rich. What will you say on the day of judgment? What will you say on the day of the Lord? As an evangelical, I believe the Bible. I believe it's infallible. The problem is that I think most of my evangelical friends are very selective in the passages that they read. They love to read those passages about sanctification and predestination and eternal security and that we're saved by grace. And I thank God we are saved by grace. But they don't want to read all the things that cause them discomfort. So this needs to be said. that Jesus caused people discomfort. Martin Luther King caused people discomfort. I think it was Reinhold Niebuhr said, the task of the church is to comfort the troubled and to trouble the comfortable. That's what Martin Luther King was about. Troubling those of us who have become comfortable with the injustices and the oppression that we as a people are bringing about in today's world. The reason why I said all of that about wealth being concentrated in the hands of the few is simply this. The thing that brought about the Great Depression in the 1930s was exactly that. And the middle class had less and less buying power until they reached that point where they didn't have enough money to buy the things that were being turned out by the American factories. When we lose the ability, when we middle class people lose the ability to buy what American produces, America will stop producing. And that's what brings on a depression. It's interesting to me that we live in a society where the very wealthy are paying such a small level of taxes. I love Ronald Reagan, but I have to remind my friends that Ronald Reagan raised taxes 11 times when he was president of the United States. I know Rush Limbaugh would not like that to be said, and he's not about to say it. But Ronald Reagan understood that you can't overtax the middle class and let the rich off the hook. I think Martin Luther King would say exactly the same thing. Here, then, is the reality. One of our leading evangelical leaders who's in politics today wants to get rid of the income tax and replace it with the sales tax. Let me show you just how evil that is and what Martin Luther King would say about that. We're going to get rid of the income tax and we're going to have a sales tax. You take a Bill Gates who makes millions of dollars daily. He spends only a small fraction of that on any given day. Even if he buys a mansion, even if he buys 5 cars to drive around, he's only spending a small proportion of his income, which means only a small proportion of his income is going to be taxed. But that factory worker that makes $55,000 a year, who has to pay his mortgage, has to pay his payments on his car, who has to buy food and gasoline, which is going sky high, spends what percentage of his income? Answer, 100%. So what you do when you shift from a income tax to a sales tax is simple. Middle class people end up paying 100% tax because they spend all their money on just staying abreast of things, especially when their income is going down every year. And nobody's going to argue that the income of the middle class in terms of buying power is declining every year. So you want to shift from an income tax to a sales tax? And this leading evangelical politician says, this is my plan for the future, and if I run for president, this is what I am going to advocate. Gee, do we do simple math? Do we think, are evangelicals stupid, or are they complicit with evil? It's one of the two. Because you can't deny the fact that if you shift from an income tax to a sales tax as a means of supporting the country, that the middle class and the lower classes are going to, in fact, be carrying 100% of the burden, 98% of the burden. And the rich, which spend very little of their massive income, I mean, what do they do with their money? They invest it in offshore banks. You know it, I know it, all the people who are watching this know it. And you know what Martin Luther King would be saying today? Woe unto you. Woe unto you, legislators, who have been bought off. I really have a solution to America's political problems. I think that congressmen should have to do what NASCAR drivers do. Wear the emblems of those who financed them all over their suits, so at least we knew who owned them. Because the truth is, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, running for office today takes vast amounts of money. And those who finance those campaigns are controlling America to serve their interest, and they're not serving the interest of the ordinary citizen. I think this is the kind of thing that Martin Luther King would rile against, scream against, yell against. I wish he was around today. You say, can't you do it, Campolo? No, I can't. Why? Because God gave to Martin Luther King eloquence. He was able to put into words the concerns. I'm a sociologist. I've been talking like a sociologist. Martin Luther King knew how to go to the hearts of people, know how to touch their emotions. He did it with words, and nobody has come along who has been able to articulate the pain and the sufferings of the oppressed like he did. His letter from the Birmingham jail is one of the classic pieces of literature that I think every American ought to read. They ought to make every high school kid read the letter from the Birmingham jail. When he says to the white ministers of Birmingham, you say that we shouldn't be expecting change to occur too quickly. Well, I want to tell you why I can't wait. And he starts talking about what prejudice and discrimination has done to his little girl, to his little boy. These are the things that disturb him.